Welcome to Grappling with Gray, a forum for promoting an ethical mindset and ethical decision-making to help us more clearly see both sides of complex issues and better navigate the world challenges of everyday life. I'm Rabbi Yamson Goldson, and I would like to welcome my guest today. With me is Jennifer Elder, who is a CPA and certified speaking professional who helps leaders future-proof their businesses by making smart decisions and staying ethical. Diane Helbig is Chief Improvement Catalyzer at Helbig Enterprises, providing guidance and training to business owners and leaders around the world. And Mark O'Brien is founder and principal at O'Brien Communications Group, a B2B brand management and marketing communications firm, and host of The Anxious Voyage, a syndicated radio show about life's trials and triumphs. Thank you all for being with me today.
Thank you.
Pleasure.
And here is our topic. It's almost that time again. Get ready to set your clocks forward an hour, or is it back an hour? Some people love daylight savings time. Some people hate it, and some people don't care, don't see what the point is, or just don't like the semi-annual ritual of changing the clocks. In March 1918, President Woodrow Wilson signed the Standard Time Act, putting daylight savings time into effect for the first time in the U.S. to save energy costs during World War I. In February of 1942, President Franklin Roosevelt did the same thing. When the 1973 oil embargo hit, President Richard Nixon signed the year-round DST law, hoping to ease the national gas crisis. The time change proved unpopular. According to NBC News, 8 Florida children died in traffic accidents that were linked to the time change, which was reversed in October 1974 by Gerald Ford. 2 years later, Senator Marco Rubio, let's try that again, I'm really tongue-tied today. 2 years ago, Senator Marco Rubio introduced the Sunshine Act in an effort to make daylight savings time permanent once again, and once again there was great debate. So here we are. What are the ethical questions involved in changing the clocks, especially given that the 24-hour clock seems to be an arbitrary construct? Arguments that daylight savings time saves energy usage and saves lives on the highway are widely contested, and the benefits for agricultural work are similarly unclear, especially in our age of mechanization. Is this all much ado about nothing? Or is there really a compelling argument one way or the other? How do we approach the issue in a way that takes all views into account? The floor is open.
This being an election year may be a matter of democracy. And what I mean is, I think it might be worth finding out, although I have to say, it never troubled me a bit. I've had 2 children. I have 4 grandchildren. I never had any issues. My sons don't have issues with their kids. I've had more pets than I can count. I've never had any issues with them. I hear people say, well, my dogs don't know what time it is to eat. But I would just start by saying, if such a poll were to be taken, I would suggest if more people are affected than are not, then we have to decide which way to go with standard time or saving time.
It doesn't seem like and I could be missing it, but I don't remember ever really hearing any information around whether it's useful, whether there is the benefit that originally it had. You figure it started over 100 years ago. A lot of things have changed. So is it really something that we even need to be doing anymore? And all those constituencies, is anyone reaching out to them to ask them whether this has an impact or not? I mean, it might be just an exercise in futility.
And so, Diane, would you keep it standard time or daylight saving time?
I would keep it standard time. I have to tell you, it does affect my animals.
Really?
So therefore it affects me. Yes, because my animals eat every morning around 5 o'clock in the morning. So when we jump back or whatever it is we do, whichever one, at 4 o'clock in the morning, they're knocking on my, head that it's time to eat. I don't want to get up at 4 o'clock in the morning. You know what I mean? So yeah, they're very, they know what time it is. It's weird. And I wish they didn't, but they do. So.
Well, they notice based on the light.
Yeah.
So they're deciding, and I have the same issue with my animals. In the fall, it is a nightmare for me because they think they should be eating an hour earlier than they normally do. And prior to this recording, you could hear my cat scream in the background because if it's dinner time and he's not getting fed when he's supposed to, all heck breaks loose. But is that a reason? Are my two cats a reason to change something?
Right.
And I did a little bit of research on this. The first, it's often raised as an energy saving matter. The research does not bear that out.
That's interesting.
And the original person who said that this made a difference was Benjamin Franklin, based on how many candles people burn at night. Well, we don't burn candles for light anymore. And there is research on, that says, there's some research that said energy usage increased from 1 to 4%. There are other studies that say it makes no difference. Then there are the issues around car accidents. And in New York City, they're investing millions of dollars on lighting for pedestrian safety. But then, when we turn the clocks back, there are more people out after dark. So there's more crime. They say that might be the reason there's more crime, but there's
Interesting.
They're competing
Yeah.
studies to say either side. So there's no definitive answer as to does it make a difference or not. People have
So
said
wouldn't that say that it
farmers.
doesn't? I mean,
I don't know.
Well, yeah, it's,
I live in a farming community, and the farmers
they
up
care?
here don't care.
It goes back to the animals, right? When the animals are ready, you get up. They don't care what time the clock is.
right.
Though, and maybe this is why I don't have an issue with animals. My dog Eddie is a complete sack rat. If I let that guy stay in bed all day, he would. And my cat Sammy thinks he's a dog. So maybe that's why he doesn't start
That could be.
campaigning. He doesn't start campaigning early. I will say, when I was a considerably more active cyclist than I have been of late, I very much appreciated daylight saving time because I could be out later. Big difference.
Mhm.
I suppose I
I
should say
just,
that all
it's
of my
the back and
animals.
forth that is, having, and I'll tell you something else. We used to have an atomic clock. And when they changed the weekend that they play this game, the atomic clock was not updated. So our clock would change a week before daylight savings time would go into effect.
Wow.
Yeah. And so I had to get rid of the atomic clock, let me tell you. I mean, now I don't have that anymore, but because it was on this schedule thing. So it just feels so arbitrary to me. And it creates such a, I wonder what would happen if we just didn't do it at all and no one said anything about it. And would anyone notice?
Well,
I think that's
isn't it
the
Arizona, I think?
consistency.
Well, there are
Arizona
states that
There's a
don't have it.
challenge.
yeah, some parts of Indiana.
Yeah.
There are places that change and places that don't. So there are times when you're off by an hour, and then there are times of the year you're off by 2 hours. So my question, and I couldn't find an answer on this, was how much does this cost businesses when people are trying to figure out meetings or presentations? We're doing so many presentations virtually, and somebody calls me and says, we'd like you to do a presentation at 2 o'clock. And we really do have to remember to say 2 o'clock where.
Yeah. Right.
And apparently Massachusetts is looking into not only dropping daylight savings time, but moving to Atlantic time to match Canada, which would mean that they are actually an hour ahead
Oh,
of
boy.
East Coast
Of
time.
Eastern time?
Yes,
Of the whole East Coast?
yes.
Oh, well, that
You know,
makes no
that
sense.
reminds me, when my sons were little, we had a clock in the dining room. And I always used to tell them that that clock was set to San Juan time and they're 1 minute ahead. Um, and I have to say, Jonas, and what Diane was saying about the atomic clock makes me think about your comment at the beginning that the 24-hour clock is an arbitrary construct.
Yeah.
I want to know what you mean by that. Were you talking about the fact that the military uses a 24-hour clock?
No, just dividing the day into 24
hours.
units. I mean, you might be interested to know that actually that is a rabbinic, has a rabbinic source.
Really?
Yeah.
It reminds me of the joke about the guy who called and ordered a pizza, and the guy at the pizza shop said, "Well, do you want it cut in 8 slices or 6?" The guy said, 6. I don't think I can eat 8.
Yeah, the guy was Yogi Berra, Mark.
Oh, why am I not surprised?
Well, now it makes perfect sense.
Right.
Yeah.
I think
Yeah,
that the
it's,
struggle for me is consistency.
Yeah, me too.
And
It's a good
even
time.
down, I live on the East Coast, but where's the dividing line? And who decided the dividing line between East Coast time,
Right.
Central time, and
Yeah.
Mountain time, Pacific? It just seems so arbitrary.
Well, I think originally that had to do with when the sun came up in those places, how far apart that timing was. But then you screw with it because then some states change and some don't. And so yeah,
in some
You
states.
know,
And-
if
and
this ever comes up for official debate again, I want to be on that committee.
I do too.
That's going to be fun.
I wonder how
think
we
about,
apply for that.
I
But
go
what's
back to
coming out of this?
businesses.
Yeah, what's coming out of this is going back to your comment at the beginning about democracy, Mark. Lots of people have lots of different reasons and lots of different issues that may not be life-shattering, but are still part of quality of life. Certainly in the Orthodox community, it's extremely relevant to us because we can't say the morning prayer. We can't start the morning prayer before dawn. So if we stay on daylight savings time into the winter, that means that a lot of us aren't getting to work on time
Yeah.
because you simply can't pray in time to finish and get anywhere. In the summer, as it is, the Sabbath doesn't go out until nightfall, which in the middle of winter is extremely late. We were living in Atlanta, which was on the very western edge of the eastern
Right.
zone, and it was Sabbath for us until about 10:30 at night in the middle of summer.
Wow.
Now, you live with it. It's
Sure.
not the end of the world, but these are disruptions that don't necessarily have uh, commensurate benefits.
True. Having said that, before 1918, if I'm understanding this history correctly, the time was always what it was where you were. So somehow people managed to survive and thrive and build businesses and pray and get to work and all those other, harvest their crops and whatever. Kids got to school and all of that for hundreds, thousands of years. And it's just like in the past, a little over 100 years that we've been messing around with this. I don't know. I mean,
And who decided that the difference should be an hour?
An hour.
What, I mean, if you think about it, the different time zones, Eastern, Central, Mountain, Pacific, are based on the sun being overhead at noon. So if we're saying that the seasons change and dawn and dusk are at different times, who decided that an hour made sense?
Yeah.
Well,
You
all
know.
likelihood it was just a matter of convenience, but in India, they have half-hour time zone changes, which makes it real exciting when you try to do business
Wow.
with India. And I don't know if it's still true, but it used to be, at least in the Soviet Union, that there was one time zone for the entire country. And you're talking about a country that goes, a third of the way around
Yeah,
the
it's
world.
huge. Yeah.
Mark,
All
we're
right.
not hearing it.
I wanted to know who the original troublemaker was.
Yeah.
So I just went and looked. Time zones were introduced in North America in 1883
Bye.
to provide a uniform train schedule for departures and arrivals. Sir Sanford Fleming, a Canadian engineer, proposed the use of worldwide time zones in 1878.
Oh, see the Canadians again. Here,
Yeah.
sorry, I didn't really mean to say that out loud. Let's clip that part out, shall we? It's again. Yeah, that's interesting.
For train schedules. I mean, I would have thought something like that might have come about in Europe.
I wonder what they did before.
Right.
Yeah. Yeah.
Well, it's sort of like
Wow.
standardized
Well, I think it was,
calibers for
again, it
guns.
goes back to noon is when the sun is directly overhead. And when not everybody could carry a pocket watch,
Yeah.
you could estimate the time based
Oh,
on where was the sun.
Yeah.
And for a train that's traveling over so many miles, it becomes much more complicated to figure out the time if there is not one standard. So I understand that piece.
Yeah. Yeah.
But I don't understand the 1 hour
I don't either.
change to daylight
Changing it.
time.
Yeah.
But anytime people talk about making a change to something that's existed, my question, I actually have two questions always. Why? And why now? And I don't know that we have, Jonas, and you mentioned people have different opinions on this that are all over the place. In the research I found, there was somebody who was, I think in California, they were voting on it. And one of the state senators said, I just like it.
Okay.
That's,
Okay, well.
that's not a reason, but
It's not a
But
reason.
for
it is
that
very
person,
California.
it's a reason.
It really is very California.
And I grew up there, so I'm entitled to that opinion. Anyway, no, but I think your point's well taken, Jennifer. And I think it applies, again, beyond this topic, that there may be lots of ideas that sound good, or that feel good, or that we just like, or that intuitively, it kind of makes sense. Give agriculture workers a longer day.
Yeah.
It kind of makes sense. Have the sunlight longer so you'll burn less electricity. It kind of makes sense. People will get in fewer car accidents. But do we really know whether any of that's going to pan out? And there are always unintended consequences,
Right.
which generally don't turn up until it's
They implement.
already happened.
Yeah.
I could have sworn in Ohio that we voted to get rid of the change and just keep it, I think, on the daylight schedule. And yet every, what is it, 6 months, I don't know, when we're doing this thing, I find out, and my husband and I look at each other and go, I thought we voted not to do this anymore, but we're still doing it.
Speaking
So
of democracy.
Why is it a different day every year?
Yeah, it seems like
Oh.
it seems like we change back later in the fall and earlier in the spring than we used
They
to.
started that a few years ago.
It was
They-
Halloween.
You know what? I think that actually had to do with the Super Bowl, Because when I was a kid, that was in early January. Now it's in February.
Okay, can we say arbitrary a couple of times? This
Sure.
is okay. So that is so arbitrary
Yeah.
that for me that says this is pointless, because if we're changing it around because of football, I love football, but for football or whatever, then it's random.
Diane, if I thought for a moment that you would take me seriously, I never would have said it.
That's not nice.
No, but but that's
If
very much
it's
the point,
based
though.
on, if it's based on seasonality, if it's based on dawn and dusk, then in theory, it should be literally the same day every year, not
Sure.
the
Or
second
at least,
Sunday.
or at least the first week. I mean,
Oh.
weekend is a time of convenience. Between Saturday and Sunday, there's a
Right.
certain logic to that.
Right.
But
That's
that you're joking about the Super Bowl, Mark. It sounded entirely plausible
Well, I felt for it.
because the whole thing sounds so ludicrous. There was
Oh.
there was a teacher in our local Jewish day school. He had a wicked sense of humor, and the principal at the time had a reputation for being extremely thrifty. Some might say stingy.
Hmm.
So one morning there was a note in everybody's box that said, in order to save electricity, classrooms on the eastern side will keep their lights off in the morning, and classes on the western side will keep their lights off in the afternoon to make more use of natural lighting. And everybody believed it
I believe that.
Wow.
because it was a joke. The principal
But
hadn't
it
said
makes
this at all.
sense.
But the
Mhm.
principal is the type of person that would have come up with something like this.
Yeah.
And this is really, it's not just a trivial issue. It speaks to the trust that we have in the people who have the responsibility to make decisions about our country.
Do we?
And
I was
if
just
they,
going to say,
if
Diane,
we
you
can't
must take
rely
issue
on
with that.
them to address an issue like this with any kind of common sense, then my gosh, what are we to think? Well, I guess we're already thinking it.
Oh, I'm
Well,
pretty much thinking, I
the-
mean, how do you trust any of, well, okay, never mind.
So Diane, I don't mean to pick on you, but
Go ahead.
didn't you trust your elected representatives to take the votes that you and your husband and other people cast in favor of doing away with the time change?
I'm not even, first of all, I'm not even sure that our memory is correct and that we cast a vote. It could have been that
Oh,
they were making a
okay.
decision in the House and, the state capitol. We just have this memory of a decision being made. And because no, I don't. Listen, when the people vote, recently we got to vote, and then the government didn't like the vote. So they said, we're gonna have to think about this for a minute. Yeah, no.
So I think radical as this proposal might be, I think what we ought to do is circulate a petition to do away, not only with the change of the hour, but also with time zones. And we can sell that on the notion that we'll eliminate jet lag.
I would be fascinated to see if that worked.
What could go wrong?
What could possibly go wrong in this country where no one can agree? Right.
Oh,
Yeah.
yeah. So, well, I was going to ask a question, but what it's going to bring back by way of answer is there's no definitive research. The question I was
Right.
going to ask is, well, what difference does it really make? And an hour? I mean, the only time it bothers me is when I lose an hour's sleep, and
Right.
I'm over it within an hour of the time I get up in the morning.
Because it's arbitrary.
Right. And then on the other side of the coin, when I'm going to gain an hour's sleep, I stay up an hour later.
I stay up 2 hours later.
I mean, it's just so stupid.
Then you have to change the clocks.
Oh, that's a whole other thing.
Brilliant.
When we've been in this house a little less than 2 years, and when we It had been gutted to the stud. So we said, okay, we'll buy it if my wife Ann can design it, which is what happened.
Yeah.
So my wife's a Paisan. Her name is Graziano, and we bought Bertazzoni appliances, and they outsource their service. So you don't get a Bertazzoni service guy. And the guy who comes, I can never remember his name, so all I call him is Seaweed. But we have an oven in the wall, and that has a clock on it. And then the stove top vent, the vent hood has another clock. We can change the time on the hood. We can't change the time on the other one.
You're kidding.
No. So when the time changes, that clock is going to be correct again. And I've spent 6 months telling Ann, well, we better call Seaweed and get him over here to fix the clock. Wow.
Ugh.
Okay. So let's look at another side of it. If we didn't do this, would we have anywhere near this much amusement?
Oh, well, there you go.
Yeah.
I think we could find it someplace else, but that's it.
Well,
and
that's
maybe
what
a
Congress is
healthier
for, right?
version.
Right.
Oh,
Where is
boy.
the plane?
Well,
Yeah.
states are allowed to make their own decisions, but they also have to get approval from the Department of Transportation.
Aha.
that's who
because of the
governs this.
trains.
Apparently. It's related to the Uniform Time Act of 1966.
You are
Thank
a
goodness
wealth of
you were here,
information,
Jennifer.
Really?
We never would have known that.
Oh, thank you, Mr. Google.
We drove, my wife and I drove into Indiana. I had a student who was getting married, and we went for the wedding. And we got into our hotel room. And we were 2 hours early before, so we had plenty of time to get settled in, get showered, get dressed. And then I look at the clock and I go, what?
Oh,
Wedding's in
no.
half an hour? I call downstairs. My wife calls downstairs and says, excuse me, what time zone are we in? Desk clerk says, gosh, I don't know.
Right.
Wow.
Ours.
Wow.
Right.
Mhm.
And is it, I could be mistaken about this, but is it the whole state that doesn't comply or just part of it?
I cannot tell you definitively.
I
I
think
knew at
Indiana's
one time.
split.
I think it is.
Yeah,
Could you imagine?
Indiana quit.
They
daylight
did quit?
time.
Oh,
Yeah.
okay.
Oh, okay.
Well, Midwesterners have so much more sense than we do.
Well, yes, we do.
I live in Connecticut, the land of the uptight pilgrim.
Oh
We're
my
not-
God, my sister lives in Connecticut, and
We're
that's
not
what she
changing
says
anything
about her
around
husband.
here.
Yeah,
Where in Connecticut does she live?
Fairfield.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, we're not changing
Well,
anything.
again, we think about how arbitrary this is. If you look at a map of time zones, a third of Tennessee is in the Eastern time zone, about 2/3 of Kentucky. On the top and bottom of Indiana, there are little pockets on the
Hmm.
western side that are Central Time. There's a little the upper peninsula of
Michigan?
Wisconsin or Michigan, I'm sorry. There's a little piece.
Wait,
So-
it's not a straight line?
No, there's no straight
Ah,
line for
see?
any of these. There are, and I would understand this if it was, if the map went by state. Wouldn't
Sure.
be perfect, but when the separation between central and mountain time could almost be a straight line down from Montana, Wyoming, Colorado, New Mexico. But no, it bumps into North Dakota, South Dakota, Nebraska, and a tiny bit of Kansas.
Then how can that be? Then how can time zones be set on where the sun is at noon?
Well, I mean, who knows?
You know what? I'm going to guess.
But
that the
again, it all goes back to the fact that so much of this appears to be
Arbitrary.
don't we
if it's
think though?
arbitrary, how do we
Hate
decide
arbitrary.
whether it's better to stay with what we have that's arbitrary or change back to something that is still arbitrary?
Right?
I'll bet
And-
though that the people in states that are split are a lot smarter than we are because they have to do a lot more calculation. Like
That's
think about
true.
what you have to plan to go to grandma's house on Thanksgiving. Right?
Could you
Even if
imagine
it's
living
like,
across the street from someone who's an hour later than you?
right? Don't come over yet.
Right.
Oh, wow.
Well, and you know, those of us that travel
Yeah, please.
coast to coast or overseas, you know, we do a lot of math on, okay, do I want to fly out from the East Coast to California during the
Right.
day, or
Right.
because I'm gaining all that time?
Yeah.
And then we fly back on the red eye because you don't want to lose an entire day on a plane.
Right.
It's also
So
interesting how
Jonathan, to your
Zoom has
point,
affected this, because we're now interacting with so many more people in different places
Right.
that you always have to put down your time zone.
Always.
And if it's
Always.
not there, you just assume they're on the East Coast.
mhm.
But if you
I
schedule
always put
something
mine
in
on.
Zoom, it adjusts the time zone.
Yes,
Well,
it
yeah,
does.
but
Yeah.
but it only but when if I'm using Calendly or one of these links, it does it automatically.
Right.
But if you're a Luddite like I am, and you still actually talk to people and interact to choose the time, then you have
Oh,
to have that time zone there.
Right.
that.
And
I have to do
the
time
only thing-
converter, because I have a podcast and I get people from like Australia who want to be on it.
Oh,
It's
yeah.
like, okay, I have no idea what time it is wherever. Then they'll say to me, "Wait, that's the middle of the night here."
Yeah.
Okay, well,
Mhm.
figure it out. So,
So we're arbitrary on both sides of this.
yes.
And then, Jonas, and you mentioned another one of my favorite questions would be, with any change, what are the unintended consequences?
How do
What
we
are
know
we
till we
not
do it?
thinking about? Because this isn't really a rational decision. There is no definitive research on either side. So how do we make a decision? And how do we evaluate the unintended consequences? Because we don't know from whose perspective we should be looking at this. Do we
Yeah,
look at
the only
farmers
decision
and say it affects them? Do we look at New York City and people walking on the sidewalks? Do we look at the consequences to them? I mean, it makes it really hard to make a rational decision and the options are purely arbitrary.
Yeah, I mean, I think the only decision I made is that I like Marco Rubio a lot less since he started pushing for daylight savings time.
And then we should roll
That's
this
what did it?
grenade, under the door. If in parts of the country or the world, well, the country, I suppose, that rely on solar, that's going to have some effect on those folks too.
I don't know.
The sun's going to be out the same amount of hours either way.
Yeah.
Well, I know, but
If you
Unless you
don't
have
have, if you don't have the ability to store
You can't store it, yeah.
Bingo.
the
Oh,
energy,
okay. Well,
then
yeah.
yes.
Yeah.
You know,
Yeah.
if you need to use it and you don't have the ability to store it, then that becomes a bit
Yeah.
of an issue. And we were having this conversation yesterday. I work with some people who are in the UK. UK does daylight savings time, but not the same time that we do. So once we switch, we have to do math and figure it out. And then we have to try and remember, when do they switch? It's like, there, it doesn't show up on my calendar because my calendar says, US Eastern time. But if I'm trying to book a meeting with somebody in the UK, no,
Right.
this just gets confusing.
Right.
Yeah. And I have the same issue you do, Diane, that I have guests from other parts of the world. And I've had situations where Google Calendar can't figure it out. And I get these
Wow.
panicky emails, why did you schedule me for 4 a.m?
Right.
Didn't.
And what I wonder about that too, and I was thinking about it when you first mentioned it, Diane, if we're having somebody on our respective programs
Yeah.
from another part of the world, how come we always do them in our time? I mean, I'm going to have a guy on my show from Japan. How come I don't have to get up in the middle of the night
Sure.
to talk to the guy?
But this is why I always try and figure out, am I going to do it early in the morning, my
Mhm.
time, or, in the evening, my time? We try and figure out what, and they're very accommodating, which is great, but I don't want them getting up in the middle of the night to,
Yeah.
accommodate my schedule. But
Especially-
I will tell you also that when other people ask me to go to their calendar, if I go and all the times are in the evening, I have to think about whether I want to have that conversation.
Mhm.
Because I not necessarily, I like to stop, usually when I'm working. So, it feels to me like this is probably the conversation we're having is probably why nothing has happened with this.
And it
Mhm.
reminds me, I wanted to ask you, Jonathan, is this particular conversation an ethical one or a logical one?
Yeah.
Or have we decided we're just not going to figure it out logically, so we might as well approach it ethically?
Well, I would say that ethics has to be based on logic. If you're not being logical, how can you possibly be ethical?
Well,
And
I think
if decisions are being made arbitrarily, well, you might end up in the right place by accident.
Yeah, but
But
doesn't that bring us back to time again? And, even a broken clock is right twice a day.
Twice a day, right?
well, when I teach about ethics, one of the things I will talk about is the difference between a difficult decision and an ethical decision. And one of the differences for me is that in an ethical decision, there are negative consequences to someone. And often the negative consequences are with people that do not have any control in the situation. Not always, but I mean, that to me, that really is where we get into the ethics part, is somebody is going to be hurt. Somebody's going to be happy. Somebody will be hurt no matter what we do. So we have a right versus right dilemma. We have people who would say it's right to maintain daylight savings time. You'll have people who would say it's right to get rid of it.
Hmm.
And how do we decide who's got the right or right? And to me, this is when we bring in the logic and say, I'm not sure we can decide who's the right or right here, because it's an arbitrary thing to begin with.
But maybe we use Mr. Spock in The Wrath of Khan and say the needs of the many outweigh the needs of the one or the few. And that's how you
utilitarianism.
That goes back to Mark talking about maybe we need to have a referendum nationally.
Well, what I was thinking about when you were talking, Jennifer, is something that Jonathan, if I recall correctly, says frequently, which is in Congress, people used to talk to each other and work things out and try to make, the best available compromise, recognizing that not everyone would get exactly what everyone wants.
Mhm.
So I guess that's another way of putting what you were saying, Jennifer, that, somebody's going to be happy and somebody's going to get hurt. But it seems to me if the conversation were reasonable and ethical enough, that could be balanced. A balance could be agreed upon, I guess is the best way to put it.
Right.
Right. And another element, and maybe we'll wrap up with this, and we can carry it on into the second segment, that, how important is an issue proportionately to the amount of time, effort, and energy we spend trying to resolve it?
We better not be the poster kids for that question.
I mean, the cost of the solution should not outweigh the benefits.
Oh, I like that.
And, again, how do we decide? There's no definitive research that will quantify it. Everything seems to be much more anecdotal.
Well, it does remind me of what my father often said. If it ain't broke, don't fix it.
Don't fix it. I know.
So, we had a default that worked for an awful long time. It's not clear at all that this change has produced any kind of tangible or measurable benefits.
Right.
And isn't it at least arguable that unintended consequence typically manifest as an unexpected cost, regardless of how you define cost?
right? It's usually not something good. So interestingly, what I just realized is if there had been really negative consequences from this decision being made, it would have been changed. So is it having this set up this way, is it negatively impacting anyone other than those of us who have to retrain our animals? And is that really that big of a deal? You know, it takes a week.
And they, the study that said there was a change between 1% and 4% of energy usage that occurred in Indiana when they stopped daylight saving time. So they could look at energy usage before and energy usage after.
Right.
But my question would be, that's got to be different for Indiana versus Florida
Sure.
versus Vermont.
Uh-huh.
They're different energy usage. We
Yep.
got AC in Florida, we've got heat in Vermont, and Indiana's kind of towards the northern side, but not terribly. So I imagine that whatever study you do would change based on the climate.
Right.
And how do you balance those studies?
Right.
Yeah. Well, lots of questions.
No answers.
We had some fun. We don't always have to try to solve the most substantial, substantive issues of the world.
Goodness.
But thinking about the little things, I think, is often beneficial to building those mental muscles and ethical muscles
Yeah.
to tackle the really important issues as well.
Yeah.
So for now, we'll leave it there. Thank you, Jennifer Elder, Diane Helbig, Mark O'Brien. Always a pleasure. Appreciate
Thank
your
you.
thoughts, your insights, your observations. For those of you who are watching or listening, if you have a topic you'd like us to take up, please go to my website, ethicsninja.com. Use the contact information. Submit your idea if it's compelling. We'll take it up for a future episode. And as always, encourage you to continue grappling with the gray.